Hey everyone, welcome back to the Barney Homestead. My name's Jessica, and as you will see from behind me, we are in my kitchen today. So today is going to be a little bit of a recipe video. And it is a Friday, and on Fridays in our house, we make pizza, cast iron pizza. It is our favorite. We started with thin crust, and I have recently gotten into deep dish, and it is really, really good. So I am gonna be taking you along as I make our deep dish pizza for tonight from start to finish. So we're gonna start with making the dough right now because the dough needs a little bit of time to rise and go through its process before it's ready to be used later today. Now the dough recipe is not mine. Let me take a peek. It is from Sally's Baking Addiction. I will put a link for it in the description below. I do modify the process a little bit because I found that there's a different way that works a little bit better for me. So I will share that with you as I go and do it. But that is what we are going to get started with, making the dough. And again, this is going to be a deep dish pizza crust. Deep dish pizza crust is traditionally made with a little bit of cornmeal. That is what kind of gives it that deep dish flavor. It's also laminated dough. Sounds a little complicated maybe. It's really not. So I'm going to talk you through all of that throughout our time together today. The other thing I want to mention, the one modification that I make to this recipe. So if you're using this recipe, you'll see that the first step of making the crust, she kind of has you combine everything in the bowl and mix it together before you do your first rise. Now, I personally like to bloom or activate my yeast first before I add it to my dry ingredients, specifically because I buy my yeast in bulk and I store it in the fridge. And so just to make sure that it is still active and good and can get those bubbles, I activate the yeast first. So that's just gonna be one of the differences. So I'm gonna start with that. All you do to activate yeast is add a little bit of the yeast, 2 1/4 teaspoons, to some warm water. And again, that's all in the directions in the recipe, and add a little bit of sugar to it so the yeast has something to eat. So I'm gonna go ahead and warm up my water and add my yeast to it. So I have got my water right here. It's 1 1/4 cups water, and I have a probe thermometer, and this is how I just check the temperature. When you are activating yeast, you need your water to be between 100 to 110 degrees. Right now, mine is about 111, which is perfectly fine. So you can see right there, 111 degrees Fahrenheit. So to your water, you're going to add a tablespoon of sugar. And I use a whisk just to mix it all together. And then you're gonna take your yeast and you're gonna add that to the water and sugar mixture. So again, this is 2 1/4 teaspoons of yeast. I'm using active dry yeast. If you buy the packets, it's just 1 packet, that's the equivalent. And so once I add the yeast, I'm gonna go ahead and just give that a little stir. So it's all together in here. And I'm gonna let that bloom or activate. So we're gonna let that sit for 10 minutes. So I've got my mixing bowl here, and I am going to start by adding all of the dry ingredients to the bowl. So first is flour, and it is 3 1/4 cups all-purpose flour. So I've got my flour. Next is a 1/2 cup of cornmeal. Next is 1 1/4 teaspoon salt. And now I'm just gonna go ahead and give this a good mix so that it's all evenly distributed. So now it's time to add the wet ingredients to the dry ingredients. First, it's going to be a 1/4 cup melted butter. You wanna melt this and let it sit at room temperature for a few minutes. You don't want it to be too hot when you add it or you will kill the yeast. You also are gonna need a 1/4 cup of softened butter when we do the dough lamination. So I've got the other 1/4 cup of my stick of butter, and I'm just gonna put that on the side to use later. So in goes the butter. Next, I'm gonna add the sugar, water, and yeast mixture. And so this is what your yeast should look like after it activates. You'll see it's nice and bubbly. You can see on the side here that you've got your bloomed yeast filling up and then your water on the bottom. That's exactly what you want to see. And then I'm just going to turn my mixer on low speed and let this knead for about 5 to 7 minutes until it's all nice and incorporated. So as the dough is behind me mixing, I am going to get my proofing bowl ready, and all I'm going to do is add a little bit of olive oil to the inside. When you add the dough to it, you just want to make sure the outside is coated in the olive oil, and then I'm going to cover it and I'm going to let it sit for about 1 to 2 hours until it doubles in size. All right, so it's been about 5 minutes, and basically the dough should just fall right off the hook, which this one does. It's nice and soft, and you can see it doesn't tear too easily. It's very nice and soft, very pliable. So this is exactly what you want. And now I'm just going to kind of form this into a ball and add this to the bowl with a little bit of olive oil, cover it, and then let it rise in a warm place for an hour or two until it's doubled in size. All right, so the dough now has been resting for 2 hours and it has doubled in size. As you can see here, it is nice and puffy. And now the next step is to roll it out and laminate it. And basically what lamination is, it is adding layers, typically with butter or some other type of fat, to the dough so you get that really flaky crust when it breaks, or when it bakes up, I'm sorry. So I am going to go ahead and turn this dough out onto my silicone mat, go ahead and roll it out. I roll it out in roughly like a 20 by 14 rectangle. And then I'm gonna go ahead and again, take that 1/4 cup of butter that I've had sitting out that's now room temperature and soft and spread it all over the top. Then you're gonna roll that up. This makes 2 deep dish doughs. So after you roll it up, you can cut it in half. I'm gonna freeze one for later, and then the other one is gonna go into the fridge to chill before we are ready to bake with it later on today. So let's go ahead and get laminating. Okay, so that is how you laminate the dough. Again, you're going to roll it out into a rectangle, take your softened butter, smear it all over the top, roll it up, and then you're gonna divide it into your 2 pizza crusts. So one of them is going to be used tonight. It's gonna go back in my bowl and it's gonna go into the fridge. The reason you wanna put it in the fridge is because you want that butter to solidify again so that when you go to roll that dough out to make your pizza crust and it bakes in those nice flaky layers. I believe it lasts up to 2 or 3 months in the freezer. So that's what I'm gonna do. And then I've got a backup for the next time that we make pizza. So I will be back in a few hours to talk to you about how we're going to roll it out and assemble the pizza and some tips on how you can get that perfect ooey gooey cheesy center that deep dish is known for. Okay, so we are back. Now we are going to assemble the cast iron deep dish pizza and get it ready to get put in the oven. So you're gonna wanna preheat your oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit. And you're going to get all of your ingredients, your toppings for your pizza ready to go. So I'm gonna be using sausage and pepperoni. That's how we like ours. But go ahead and prep everything that you're gonna need. The other things that I have to make the pizza, you're gonna need sauce, of course, that goes on top of deep dish. So I've got mine here. And then the secret to getting the ooey gooey center of a deep dish is using a really good cheese. And ultimately, it's gonna come down to using a whole milk mozzarella. That's what we have found works best. So I get it at my deli counter in the grocery store, and I ask them to slice it a little bit on the thick side, because that's gonna give you a really nice way to layer it on the bottom of the crust. And so as it bakes, it's just gonna bake in a really nice cheesy layer. So to get started, I am going to roll out my pizza crust, and you're going to want to, I've got a 12-inch cast iron, so I'm gonna roll my crust out to about 12 to 14 inches, somewhere in there, because you want it to be able to come up the sides of the cast iron pan a little bit. And just do your best to roll it out into as close to a circle as possible. Doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, so now that I have that rolled out, I'm gonna go ahead and prep my cast iron. All I do for this is add a little bit of olive oil to the bottom. And I just use a little brush and coat the bottom, coat the sides. And you're gonna grab your crust. You're gonna go ahead and lay it in your cast iron. And you're going to work it around the sides and make sure that it gets pressed up the sides of your pan. If you don't have a cast iron, you can do this in like a round cake pan, but the cast iron really gives it that true Chicago style deep dish crust and flavor. So now that I've got my crust in there, I'm gonna go ahead and start to lay some of my mozzarella down. It's gonna look like a lot of cheese. It definitely is a lot of cheese. Don't worry. You don't eat it every day. And even if you do, that's fine too. So I usually do one layer on the bottom, and then I'll kind of take a couple pieces, break them apart, and just go around the edges, and then I've got my piece in the middle. So next I'm going to add my other toppings. So I'm going to start with pepperoni. And then I'm going to add my sausage that I pre-cooked. And then just to make sure everything kind of stays in place as it's baking, I take a little bit of shredded mozzarella and add that on top. And then last, you're going to add your sauce to the top, on the top. So I kind of just layer it on. I use a can for this that is 13 ounces. Now we'll use the whole thing. So 12 to 14 ounces, depending on how saucy you like yours. So I just kind of pile it on and then start to smooth it out over the top. I don't go all the way to the edge because, again, as it warms up and bakes, it's gonna just marry its way nicely around the pan. And then finally, to finish, I just sprinkle a little bit of Parmesan on top. So now we are all ready to bake. It's gonna go in the oven at 425. You're gonna start at 35 minutes and then check it every 5 to 10 minutes after that. What you're looking for is a nice, crispy, deep golden brown crust. So I'm gonna pop it in for 35 and we'll come back and check it when it's ready to come out. All right, so it has been 45 minutes. And now the pizza is ready to come out. You can see it's got a nice golden brown crust. It's nice and crisp if I tap on it. So now you're gonna let it sit in the pan for about 5 to 7 minutes to start to set up. So now that our Pizza has been resting for 5 to 7 minutes. We are ready to take it out of the pan and put it onto our cutting board. Now, I know it is so tempting to want to cut into this right away, but let this sit for another 7 to 10 minutes so it continues to firm up and doesn't just become a soupy mess when you go to cut into it. All right, the moment has come. It is time to cut into this beautiful deep dish and serve it up. Now that is beautiful pizza. All right, guys, thanks so much for following along today. Let me know if you decide to try this out yourself and how it turned out, but I am gonna go enjoy this delicious deep dish pizza.